Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Grateful that all of you could join us today. Imagine, intersect, and act. What do these words mean to you? Why have we chosen them as the theme for this year's Racial Equity Week? To me, these words are powerful when you put them together. Here's why. First, we imagine what an equitable world would look like. Think about that for a moment. For many of us, that can be difficult to imagine because we know this work takes time. I know this future might not happen in 10 years or 20. That's why I turn to history to imagine an equitable future. In the Iroquois Nation, founding documents that date back to at least 1500 AD remind us of the seventh generation principle. This principle guides us to think about the impact our decisions have on the next 7 generations. It's often mentioned regarding environmental sustainability, but I think it's a lens that can be used everywhere. What would the world look like for the 7 generations ahead of us? What can we imagine for the children of our great-great-great-grandchildren? As a grandmother myself, I can't help but think about the world we're leaving to our grandchildren. When I imagine an equitable Cook County, I envision thriving neighborhoods where everyone has access to affordable housing, good jobs, healthy food, convenient public transit, quality health care, and green space. I imagine Cook County as a place where families want to live, where entrepreneurs want to open businesses, where anyone can move to any city, town, or village and find a welcoming community. I believe that what I imagine can become a reality. Whether we're fighting for climate change or against racial injustice, we have to imagine the world we want to create. Once we've imagined that world, we must intersectionally look at how to create it. We have to think intersectionally about who is impacted by the work we do. And what does that mean? It means we can't settle for expanding access to public transit if that access is only improved for able-bodied residents. We can't provide rental assistance if we only provide it for people with immigration papers. We can't impact maternal and infant mortality without addressing the fact that black women are at least 3 times more likely than white women to die as a result of pregnancy. When we imagine the future we want to see and think intersectionally about our work to achieve it, then we act. Today we act by putting our first ever racial equity policy into effect. We act by publishing our first ever Racial Equity Action Plan. This policy and this plan will build on the work that we have already done for years to shift the culture at Cook County. We have encouraged our staff to use a racial equity lens with every policy and program, including our COVID-19 recovery initiatives. Using that lens has already had an impact on the residents we served throughout the pandemic, as you can see from our 2020 impact report. The majority of our business assistance went to women and people of color. The majority of our rental and cash assistance went to women and people of color. This was intentional. We provided resources where they were needed most with an equity lens. These documents outline our plans to provide racial equity training to all staff in my administration. We've implemented a language access policy to ensure that the more than 1 in 5 Cook County residents who speak languages other than English can access our services. We've committed to strategies and measurable outcomes that hold us accountable to the public. It's not enough just to talk about equity, we must act. Otherwise, we will never know a world that is truly just, compassionate, inclusive, and sustainable. I'm going to turn the podium over shortly to Denise Barreto, but I want to acknowledge, before we begin, the commissioners who are with us. Commissioner Anaya, Commissioner Deere, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Lowry, Commissioner Miller, and Commissioner Kevin Morrison. I'd also like to acknowledge David Jones, who's providing sign language interpretation for us, and acknowledge Alex Ensign, who's been instrumental in this work, although she will not be speaking today. All right, let's begin with Denise Barreto, our inaugural Director of Equity and Inclusion.
All right.
Thank you, Madam President, not only for the opportunity today, but also the chance to lead and guide these very important efforts. I also want to thank the Cook County Government Offices under the President Racial Equity Leadership Council. Under the leadership of our Chief of Staff, Lynetta Haynes-Turner, they were charged with doing the heavy lifting and recommended we get someone to lead and double down on this effort during the pandemic versus shying away. And let me start by saying, I'm the final cog in a machine for equity that began in earnest years ago, at the beginning of this administration. Equity is not something that we just started caring about or doing. It's been at the core of Cook County government for years. See me as a coach, the facilitator, the guide. Make no mistake, my job is to shepherd equity and to be the key advocate. But everyone in Cook County government's job, not just mine, is equity. My first day at Cook County was the day after George Floyd was murdered in the early days of the pandemic, and when we were all still on lockdown. The commitment to raise the ante on the efforts has never been more clear, and I'm so excited to lead these efforts and so surprised at how emotional I'm getting. The Racial Equity Action Plan was developed in collaboration with our Racial Equity Leadership Council, our Director of Policy, Mara Hennigan, and we designed it to cover the last 2 years of the Cook County Policy Roadmap and 5-year strategic plan for the offices under the President. This is really a cohesive articulation of both work that has been in motion as well as a few new items. First off is a racial equity assessment tool adoption. We started this in our 2021 budgeting on our new revenue in a very small way and expanded it in the 2022 budget cycle. There is a 5-year vision for budgeting for equity that works to include some of the lessons learned from both our CARES Act funding strategies that have been nationally recognized and our current ARPA efforts. Second, the Racial Equity Action Policy that the President mentioned is basically a codification of some of the work this administration has been doing in our contract compliance area, leading the way locally with some of the most transparent reporting on MBE and WBE participation, and with an emphasis on growing those numbers. New is the Budgeting for Equity tool that I mentioned, building on what we've learned and picking up on what other jurisdictions around the country who are further along in this area. Finally, and that leads to the third point in this point, which is launching our racial equity and cultural competence training for all OUP employees. You know, this is where most folks start, right? People start with training, and most folks start without policy and other things in place. Training alone does not change outcomes. We are looking to build both individual and organizational competence around equity. And I want to emphasize that it's in an intersectional nature. People often get it twisted. Racial equity is not black, white, brown, or about skin color only. It covers all the aspects of diversity among us and really focuses on the folks at the intersections. I often ask myself and my peers, is what we're doing accessible to a Black or Latino, disabled, trans woman? And if the answer is no, then we're not doing enough. And then we have more work to do. That's what we mean. All aspects of marginalization is covered when we use a racial equity lens. Fourth, but really first, was our language access policy. We launched that in May, and it was designed to increase engagement by removing any barriers regarding language or ability. And finally, our Latinx strategy that develops pathways for leadership and uplifts Latino community voices, which is a great point for me to stop. and introduce Commissioner Alma Anaya.
All right.
Thank you, Denise. It is such a pleasure to be here with everyone as I join in support not only of Racial Equity Week, but in celebration, in true celebration, here with Madam President and my wonderful colleagues on the Cook County Board of Commissioners. So good afternoon, my name is Alma Anaya. I am the Cook County Commissioner of the 7th District. This year, the Racial Equity Week, which is the 3rd annual year that we celebrate this week. They're the 3 themes that the President has highlighted: to imagine, to intersect, and to act. And I often, reflect on this, especially when I saw that this was going to be the theme of this year, because Cook County has been acting, whether it's through the language access or whether it's through, ensuring that we have working elevators in all rooms and boardrooms, and whether it's just ensuring that we do everything possible to ensure that Cook County, especially around the 2 major areas that we handle, the health and hospital system and also our criminal justice system, that racial equity is at the forefront of all the policies internally and also externally, and things that we may be working on. So by working together, we can identify the innovative approaches to implementing and addressing these issues, just like it's stated. The county's Racial Equity Week creates the time and the space to engage people from across multiple sectors to dive into conversations on how the county can address racial and social justice moving forward. It is crucial that we meaningfully engage communities that have been impacted by structural racial in the creation and the implementation of institutionalized policies and practices that obviously impact our daily lives. These injustices and inequities have been further obviously highlighted through the current worldwide pandemic. The prime example is, again, within the health system and sometimes the inequities that we see with health disparities. And we need to make sure that we continue to have the conversations and to prioritize getting rid of these inequities. I applaud the county's commitment in working towards racial equity, and today's announcement of the plan is just a step forward to seek to address and to eradicate institutional and structural barriers to racial inequities that exist in any operations. We need to continue to make sure that Cook County is at the forefront of being good stewards of good public resources and accessible resources to county residents. This is a time to move these important conversations forward as communities continue to heal. Racial Equity Week represents the county's commitment to stand with our brothers and sisters as we work towards the progress in Cook County. Hola a todos, me llamo Alma Anaya, soy la comisionada del 7º Distrito del Condado de Cook. Hoy estoy orgullosamente aquí celebrando el primer día de la Semana de Equidad Racial aquí en el Condado de Cook. Sabemos que este condado es muy diverso, este condado es muy bonito de tanta gente y es algo que ha continuado trabajando el condado de Cook para que nuestras pólizas internas sea la prioridad de no nomás esas pólizas y esas prácticas, pero también de nuestro presupuesto, para que las personas en este condado tan diverso tengan oportunidades que no se les han dado en muchos otros lados. Y yo estoy muy orgullosa que este condado siempre ha estado al principio de estas iniciativas de pólizas y de cosas y leyes que han cambiado la vida de nuestros residentes. Y por eso estoy aquí celebrando esta semana, porque vamos a continuar trabajando juntos en poder que haya equidad racial aquí en este condado, que es el condado es casi el segundo más grande de todo este país, y estamos aquí como líderes, como liderazgo completo sobre esta cosa de equidad. So, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí.
Commissioner Deere?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I always start by saying God is good and all the time. Thank you so much for being here on this afternoon. This is a topic that is very passionate for me, being chair of Health and Hospital System of the Health and Hospital Committee and on the board of the Health and Hospital System. Social and economic well-being of the people that we serve is important. I sponsored a resolution about 2 years ago declaring racism a public health crisis in Cook County. What does that mean? It means exactly what the president has put forth for the last 3 years, pushing forth equality and equity. Now, equity and equality are two different things. Many individuals use them interchangeably. Equality is about getting a slice of the pie for today. Equity is about getting a slice of the pie today plus back taxes, back pie, all of the pieces of pie that you missed. It is important that we tackle this particular issue because it is important not only in the city of Chicago, Cook County, but the United States of America that social determinants of health are dealt with, but also underserved communities, which are in my district on the south and west sides of Chicago. Socrates said something a long time ago. If you always do what you've always done, you're going to always get what you've always got. That's the definition of insanity. The next quote I'll give you is a deerism. That means I made it up. In order for you to get something, in order for you to have something, get something that you've never done, you got to do something that you've never done. Sorry. In order for you to get something you've never had, you got to do something you've never done. Madam President, thank you in Cook County for doing something that we've never done. Equity. God bless you.
I knew I was next. Thank you, Commissioner Reverend Dr. Deere. It just happens to always work out that way. I represent the 1st District, west side of Chicago in the western suburbs. Thank you, Madam President, and to my brilliant colleagues for your commitment to equity and justice. And Denise, your work has been amazing, and what an incredible start to something as dynamic as it is today. Look, I mean, communities that have been struggling for generations, really require our values to lead in this moment, and that we have to be unapologetic about it. As my colleagues have already indicated, and I believe the rest of them will articulate this as well, it's been a real incredible opportunity, particularly for those of us who are brand new to the board, to be part of a structure and an opportunity to actually can bring transformation to lives that have been in desperate need for generations. I think there's no secret that unfortunately many of the policies of the past have harmed our communities through privatization and through a wicked penal system that has been addicted to the type of policies that have brought tremendous harm to black and brown folks. And so that's why I'm very, very hopeful that black communities that have been just riddled with so much pain, where black folks have been forced and pushed out of neighborhoods that have been staples for generations, and brown folks are being gentrified out of their communities. So I'm glad that this Equity Week, as a true public school educator, as President Preckwinkle is, it's important for us to have a marker where we can come back and grade our work, exchange ideas so that we can make housing affordable, and that we can actually have a healthcare system that becomes a guaranteed right, and we can have an economic system where jobs are created and people have a reason to believe and to hope. And so I'm looking forward to the work ahead, and I'm looking forward to now not putting so much pressure as my brother Deere put on me, representing the south side of Chicago, my dear friend, Commissioner Laurie.
So I'm Bill Lowry, Cook County Commissioner of the 3rd District, and it is wonderful to be here with you today. So let me just officially say from the 3rd District, happy Cook County Racial Equity Week.
Amen.
Racial equity in Cook County means all of us, including those of us who have not always been at the table, now have a seat at the table. Whether we're talking about policies, opportunities, or resources. Long overdue, but I applaud this body for taking this very, very important step. So as we talk about Racial Equity Week, let's keep in mind, at Cook County, every week is about racial equity. So enjoy this week, but always keep in mind, our work has just begun. Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam President, for putting this together, this kickoff of the press conference, for having the vision to establish the Cook County Racial Equity Week. I'm Cook County Commissioner Donna Miller of the 6th District, and I'm honored to stand here with you today and my colleagues who are all here to participate in Cook County's 3rd Racial Equity Week and to draw attention to, address, and improve our inequities that still exist in our government, our workplaces, and our society. I always say that for over 100 years, my family has been in Cook County. And if we think about the equity and the racial disparities that existed in that 100-year period, they're all things we've been talking about across our dinner tables, with our children, with our grandchildren, and talk about the future for the next generations on how we make this all better. So Cook County is very diverse. The census data shows that the makeup is 42% white, 24% black, 25% Hispanic or Latino, 8% Asian, and 2% other. So when we think about that, what is Cook County but diverse? And I'm always proud to think of my life and the things that I've been around in my professional career as living diversity. And this is an example of how you live diversity. My district in the 6th District is probably one of the most diverse in the whole county. And like the 6th District, Cook County draws its strength from its diversity, focusing on policies through an equity lens. So that serves to enhance the strength and helps ensure all of our residents have the chance to reach their full potential, to let shine their unique strengths, and that each individual and culture contributes to what is great about Cook County. And as you've said, Madam President, we all do better when we all do better. Over this last year, it's been very difficult on so many levels, from racism, pandemic, seeing our children go back to school with the unknown. And we've had many occasions to focus on equity in various aspects, such as healthcare, which has been mentioned by my colleague. But that's been a particular focus of mine as well, and wanted to also touch on how we've done a great job here in Cook County as bridging the digital divide, the transportation access, criminal justice reform, and access to quality food, to name a few. Cook County hasn't just been talking about equity, but we are acting by putting in place policies in all of these areas to bring about change and greater equity, from the Fair Transit South Cook pilot program to the digital equity funding to bond reform and the good food purchasing program. These are just a few of the many policies that the President's office has put in place for all of our residents. So I thank you again, Madam President, for your leadership, and I look forward to participating in this week's events and encourage everyone to do the same.
All right.
Next, my colleague, Commissioner Morrison.
Thank you all, and good afternoon. I'm Cook County Commissioner Kevin Morrison, and I represent the 15th District in the northwest suburbs of Cook County. I'm honored to be here to kick off Cook County's 3rd annual Racial Equity Week. I want to thank President Preckwinkle for her work to advance racial equity in Cook County. I also want to acknowledge and thank Cook County's first Director of Equity. and Inclusion, Denise Barreto, who works tirelessly to integrate racial equity principles into all Cook County operations and services. In the past 3 years, we've made great strides in advancing equity in Cook County. In 2019, I was proud to create and co-chair the Cook County Committee on Addressing Bias, Equity, and Cultural Competency alongside Commissioners Anaya, Deere, and Moore. We held public hearings, conducted research and interviews, and pored over policies and ordinances to find if and where there were inequities. One of the committee's top priorities was to create the Director of Equity and Inclusion position, which led to the hiring of Denise last year. Another top priority was to develop and implement equity and inclusion training for Cook County employees, and I want to sincerely thank President Preckwinkle for announcing today that all offices under the President employees will be required to undergo racial equity and cultural competency training going forward. We've also taken steps forward for our transgender community. We recognize that transgender people face barriers, but we know that transgender women of color are disproportionately impacted by violence and discrimination. That's why we amended the Human Rights Ordinance to ensure greater equity for our transgender community, and we made Cook County's documents and forms gender inclusive to remove barriers for transgender people and to send a clear message: no matter how you identify, you are recognized when you interact with Cook County government. We also know that communities of color disproportionately lack access to high-speed internet. And as chairman of the Technology and Innovation Committee, I'm proud of the work we're doing to expand access to broadband for all communities here in Cook County. We've started doing the hard work to build a Cook County that centers equity, diversity, and inclusion. But let me be clear, we still have our work cut out for us. We must reaffirm ourselves to ensuring every Cook County resident has the same opportunity to thrive, that everyone is treated equally by their government and under the law. To quote Frederick Douglass, we must continue to agitate, agitate, agitate to advance equity in our county. And I look forward to doing this work alongside all my colleagues and all Cook County residents. And thank you so very much, Madam President, for all your hard work on equity and for having me here with you today. Thank you.